Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Satsang. For those who are not aware, we use WhatsApp as a means of communication. You can send your questions, and they will come directly to me. So let's make some silence first. Forget about everything else. Nothing and no one exists. I will answer your question now. Okay, so the question was, what is the dark night of the soul? Difference between the dark night of the soul and clinical depression. Well, this expression is used and can get a lot of different meanings. And possibly this dark night of the soul is not the most correct expression, because what it is exemplifying is something which is not really that connected to the soul. Unless you're mistaking the soul with personality, and that is very different. But this is complicated because words don't have a meaning of its own. Everyone gives the meaning, attach a different meaning to the same words, and this makes communication confusing. But this expression talks about a moment in life where nothing else matters. There's no reason for living. But usually expression soul is not something that you use very commonly. So it is supposed to be in a spiritual context. But that doesn't mean it is really that way. And these days, everything is so mixed up. So very difficult to ascertain correctly. But that is the gross definition of it. But probably more suitable would be the dark night of the personality of the character that has reached a point that the values that it is upholding, they do not give any more they have nothing left for you, nothing else to move on, to aspire to, because they have closed you. So this dark moment is about values. So if your values are mundane in nature, of course, there will be nothing else, nothing left that can give you this soul satisfaction. And sometimes this soul satisfaction is perceived as just something that is calling, anchoring for you, don't know what it is. So for those who are experiencing this, for example, so the question here, is there a difference between the dark night of the soul and clinical depression? Maybe not, maybe not. But there can be a difference, but also maybe not so much of a difference, because it is the values that you uphold, that form, that represent who you really are, and not the values that you aspire to have, because those who are in the spiritual path, they aspire spiritual values, but that doesn't mean that those are the values that are there. So this is why there is tests, sacrifices, and all of these things in spiritual path for those who are really into that, because it is the only way that these values can be changed, see, from mundane to spiritual. Because if this is not tested, superficially you hold on to spiritual values, but deep rooted from within, these worldly values of security, greed, and all these things, they continue to be there. So this is why sacrifices are there, tests are there, so that the seeker can change his values. But as these values don't change, he becomes trapped. He cannot move on, spiritually speaking. This is the context that I'm referring here. The other contexts, no point. As Or for example, what he is expiring, or these tests that come, he is not being able to move forward, not being able to move backwards also. So this becomes a very complicated, difficult situation. But still, it is a chance to uphold these new values, to eradicate old values, and to live the process that are connected to these old values. And this can be lived, this expression of the dark night of the soul fits perfectly, see? But it is about the values that sustain the character that you are experiencing, that which the majority of you call the me. So it is these values that are behind this darkened period. As a society, for example, in the West, life has become completely useless because for the majority, there's nothing more than just to live, to work, to eat, and nothing less, nothing else, just to be safe or whatever. And money is the greatest aspiration, and all of these things. There's no vision about this, about spirituality, the quest for freedom. Also, for the majority, those values are the only ones that are there. And you just look around, as before life was more difficult, so to realize these desires for security, stability, money, and all these things, it would take a long time to have your own house, to build a family, whatever. And now everything is faster. So this recognition of the emptiness of all these things, it is quicker to be there present. But with the absence of spiritual values, of the quest for freedom, what else is there? If this is empty, there's no other values there, nothing else to aspire, so collapse. And you see, in a time where life couldn't be more easy, it could, but compared to your grandparents, for example, it is very easy to get whatever you are aspiring. The numbers of depressions have increased 1,000-fold because of these values. So in spirituality, this transition is very difficult, for some more difficult than for others, and this is what is behind these dark periods. And if it's not about this, if it's not about spirituality, it still is about spirituality, because it is about the absence of these spiritual values. They are the nature. What is? So this is where spiritual practices come. As you get this inner calling, the character that you define yourself to be is not suitable for this undertaking, because the deep-rooted values are not those that you really need to increase in yourself. So spiritual practice, they speak about, in a way, these forbidden words these days, discipline, in a way, some rigidity is there also, sacrifice, tapas, and all these things, and discipline, the word discipline. And what is the point of all of this? The point is to make the character, make the personality more suitable, for these higher values to gain roots in there. But the difficulty is that for the majority, that which is guiding their spiritual path is their own understanding, their vision of right and wrong, of what should be and what shouldn't be. And this is the trap, because the character represents like a fortress that you cannot leave. So eventually, there is these guidances about spiritual practices, and you have to look back to the old days, what is in the scriptures about this, about the spiritual disciplines, because these days commentaries, teachings, and commentaries about these things, they have become, how do you say this, too loose, too, the word, this discipline has more or less disappeared, and all these things have disappeared. So the spiritual practices have become adapted to the spiritual seeker, instead of the spiritual seeker to adapt to the spiritual practices. So by adapting to the spiritual practices, you allow this character to be transformed, and transformed. His likes and dislikes and everything which is there has to be transformed, or else it cannot continue. So this is so this is the intention behind all these disciplines and practices, is to transform the character, to make it more suitable for the spiritual quest. If this is not in place, if you're relaxing these disciplines, adapting to your way of thinking, because as always, for the majority, they have to understand something to put it in practice. And what does this mean, this understanding something? It has to be a part of your world in a way. So the more you can put things into practice without this understanding to be there, the faster this transforming of the personality occurs. It is a transformation. It is important, especially in the beginning, because what is there is too gross, too difficult to transcend. So this transformation in the beginning makes what is complex into something more simple, until eventually this transcending this character becomes possible. But this is when guidance brings this to you, not according to your understanding. So this rigidity, these disciplines, as they were described in the scriptures, with the old commentaries, not with these modern commentaries, these are the best practices, and they can fulfill what is needed, because it will allow this transformation. Because as long as these mundane values are rooted there, it doesn't matter. And I've seen this again and again, seekers in the quest for truth, and they are sincere in what they are doing, but they are trapped because they are stuck into these old mundane values, and they lack the strength to persist with spiritual disciplines, to allow any transformation, because these worldly values and this lack of strength doesn't allow for them to move beyond this. because when when any difficult test comes, these ideas pop up in the mind that no, but this is not needed. Uh, there's no effort required, and all these things, and they cannot move beyond this. And the more they crystallize in this mindset, the more difficult it becomes, until it becomes impossible. Hmm? And I've heard this again and again, because I usually uh, say that you have to prepare yourself, because eventually everything that you have been doing will be tested. And if you cannot move beyond the tests, well, then nothing left to do. Then I hear all these things, but God doesn't forsake anyone. And all that. It is true, but this time concept, it's much bigger than you imagine. And it's not you, it's not the soul. The problem lies at the personality. So this is why all these incarnations and all these things, because if it doesn't get suitable, if it doesn't serve the purpose of freedom, so what is the point of being there? So in this intense moment, spiritually speaking, about the dark night of the soul, uh, there is still a chance, because if these spiritual values are really, really more important, they will reveal themselves in this way, and the seeker will let go of whatever he has to let go. But it is difficult. For the majority, it is difficult. And as time passes, it seems that seekers are becoming more weak, more dependent to outer structures, and with less spiritual values to assist them, to guide them into their quest. So those moments, those intense dark moments, will become and have been becoming more normal experience for more and more seekers. And these values, they are the core of your spiritual practice, of your quest for truth. Because goodwill is there. Everybody wants to do their best. But if they don't understand uh, what are the rules of the game, they don't stand much of a chance. And you see people moving and going to and forming spiritual communities, alternative communities, and they find themselves suffering for the same things that they did outside the communities. And apparently, things have improved. But in a more deeper level, their anxieties are still the same, for security, acceptance, and love, but at a personal level, at a relationship level. So everything, it is still the same, because values haven't changed. And worldly values, they are a trap in itself, because it's like a road that has a wall built on it. You cannot cross it. Hmm? So spiritual practices, spiritual discipline is very important, especially in the beginning. so that a transition can happen before this quest for truth. Whatever is there served these lower, these worldly values. And then whatever you were looking for, there it is. The life that you recognize is your stage where you were looking, where you were investing to move along in the lines of those worldly values. If you're changing your values, your quest has to change. It is changing, so all else will change. It's like now I'm looking for milk, so I'm looking for a cow. Then I'm looking for orange juice, and I'm still grabbing the cow. Makes no sense. And if these changes are not happening, so spiritual practices are being adapted, disciplines are being adapted, and you're continue trapped in your own world, in your own beliefs. So this rigidity that you reject, and this discomforts and difficulties that you reject in the spiritual practice, and you want to adapt, this adapting is a way to ensure that your world remains the same. And as long as you continue to do this, if you're still too distracted with your worldly goals, and you're just using spirituality in the same sense, then you won't even see none of it. But if there is a calling, then it will become complicated, because thirst will increase, and you will invest, and you reach a point where there's nowhere else to go. And and as you don't have anywhere else to go, this depression comes, this dark moment arises. Alda, don't understand English. Português mais logo. So everybody has an opinion about what is the right things, what are the wrong things, what are the best disciplines, what is the best philosophy, and all of this. But the seeker of truth is the one who is not giving his opinions and is sincerely working. So for those of you who are losing yourself in these conversations, my advice is, if you want to get somewhere, there is anywhere else to go, okay, forget about that. If you want to get somewhere really, then work sincerely, and don't try to adapt the practices, the circumstances, even the environments around you. Don't do this. Adapt yourself to these things. It is the best. Because emptying the cup means making it more simple, until the cup eventually disappears. As it becomes more complex, and you see, if you observe a child, there's no self-definition. This continues, this self-definition, this building of personality goes with time, becomes more complex and more complex and more complex, and these structures have to be removed. And in the core of all this, it is values. And all the suffering that everyone experiences, suffering is according to values, to their own values, to their beliefs, nothing else. Beliefs dissolve, suffering dissolves. It is like this. So let's wait a little bit to see if there's any questions about this. If, not sure if there's anything else here. So we'll wait a little bit. If there's no more questions about this, then we'll end for today. So next satsang will be Thursday. Sorry, Thursday, yes. So one advice for those who are in practices is to make sure that their practices is not just about what they like to do, but amongst that, there are things in their daily practices that they do without enjoying. And for those who are in the middle of other people, there will be certainly some disrespect involving some contradictions, some oppositions to your practices. Take that, instead of defending yourselves, take that as something to help you transform by not reacting, by enduring. Can you improve your question? Symptoms of a crown chakra awakening. What does this mean? What do you want to know? You see, I'm going through your questions, your first question about depression and the story around it. And now this dark side of the soul. You see, but if you look at your first question, this answers your other questions. If there is some kind of a spiritual awakening involved that is messing up life that you were experiencing, that can happen. It can, but this is this is something that opens new paths, or else it's very difficult to happen in that way. So to look at these symptoms and try to transform it into a spiritual quest or into a spiritual experience, when the basis, and I'm just pointing the basis that you have given here in your first question into a different satsang, well, this shows, these things that you have put here, this shows that these values that I've been talking about, they are mundane in nature, because these sufferings are conditioned to the characteristics, and to the life of the character in the most fundamental mundane way. So if your question about chakra awakening is because of this depression is conditioned to a spiritual experience, a spiritual calling, or whatever, your questions would be different. It would be in the nature, I'm being pulled into this direction, but I still am trapped to this, and I believe in all these other things. This we could say, okay, so this is for spiritual reasons, and you're being pulled out of your world. But it's not the case. The reasons you have given towards your depression and your dark night of the soul, they apparently, for the information that you have given, it's not connected to that. So trying to transform it into a spiritual experience to try to understand and justify, it just makes you waste time. Are you into spiritual practices? Are you practicing anything? Are you meditating? Do you have a spiritual quest? And do you have that because of the first reasons that you give for your depression when it starts happening? All these things make a difference. If there's anything spiritual in that situation, that attention has to be there, is that the values that you are upholding concerning your own looks, your value, your acceptance, and all of these things. If there's anything spiritual to this, is the understanding that these values are causing that depression and all of that. And it is in the changing of these values. And I'm not sure, but it seems by the number that you're from India, so you're not strange to these spiritual things. So the shift in these values, this is what will open up, if the potential is there, if the calling is there, the aspiration. But this can open something. But it's not like a salvation in itself, because this state of depression, by what you have been describing, is according to mundane values alone, alone, nothing beyond this. So looking at these things and looking for symptoms to exemplify that it is a spiritual awakening, in a sense that the spiritual awakening is like a magic wand that will make things better. Oh no, everything is bad, I cannot see any end to this, but then poof, awakening, and voila, solved. This is not very constructive. Theoretically speaking, those who experience depression, in a way they are seeing by themselves that the values that they are upholding, the investments they were doing, have no value for them anymore. They are irrelevant. They are a weight even. So theoretically, these depressions could open up a hole in that life for the aspiration of the divine, theoretically speaking. But what I've seen so far is that those who fall into depression for worldly reasons, they cannot move on into spirituality. They can go into this spirituality, which is about therapy and all of this, for a while, like they go to psychologists and all these things, but real spirituality, where tests start coming, I haven't seen it so far. But theoretically, it is possible. It is possible. Okay, I'm a volunteer at Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry and was given a blessings packet from the ashram that led to my spiritual awakening in life. So, my dear, okay, so you're a volunteer at Sri Aurobindo Ashram. But what does this mean? Are you a seeker of truth? And are you, because of this first thing that you put here? I'm not reading it because I don't want to expose, but this was read in the previous satsang, and did this quest, this involvement in spirituality, has it become because of the previous reasons? Are you still experiencing those symptoms? If you weren't, you wouldn't be asking these questions. But these things are connected, you see? So at the root of all this lies the values, and you have to see for yourself these worldly values that I'm talking about, and it is not that difficult. As you observe the causes of your suffering, why are you suffering? Is it because you're not being able to move towards self-realization or merging with God, or whatever you are following? Is this your motive for suffering? Or is it about the other things that you were putting here? So the reasons of your suffering will show you definitely what values are you still upholding. And then you will know what needs to be done. So eradicating these values and planting these other values, and if you're living in an ashram, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if you're living or if you're just going there to help, whatever it is, you know what are these higher values that I'm talking about. So whatever your suffering is, this is for all of you. Your suffering is giving you the direct vision of the values that are still valued, that are still important, that are still the basis of your life. So if you're suffering because you're not progressing in your spiritual path, because you're not being able to merge with God, because awakening is not there, and the rest, what is connected to life, security, acceptance, and all of this is meaningless. And what is causing you suffering is this difficulty in moving into the spiritual path. So this reveals that these higher values are there. But if you're suffering for other things, for security, for acceptance, for relationships, for whatever, this shows you that these worldly values are there. So you're suffering. Okay, so because I prayed to become beautiful inside and out forever. Well, my dear, you should have prayed to your blindfolds to be removed, because beauty is your nature. But this is connected because of the other experience that you talked about before. So these traumas, you're just moving with these traumas and you're not going anywhere because motivations are not in the right place. And this is really, really, really just a waste of good time, because if you're in an ashram, well, there must be spiritual practices apart from praying. Praying is very good, is very, very needed, but the rest must be there also. And if you go through the practices, through the transformation process, to this simplification, you will get to a point where your eyes are able to see beauty. You see, others around you, as a complement to the first question that I'm not reading, anyone, what they feel is ugly or beautiful, it is about their own capability, the values that are there, and their capability to perceive beauty. And beauty has nothing to do with form or the object that is being contemplated, but from what is contemplating, from what is observing. So whatever form is there, it is beautiful, and you can see this beauty if your eyes are cleaned. And just by praying it, and I don't mean to underestimate prayer, not at all, because prayer is something that the majority of seekers of truth are missing. Big part that they are missing prayer and spiritual practices. And others are in spiritual practices and they are missing prayer, and this goes together. So I'm not underestimating prayer, but if prayer comes and replaces meditation and other spiritual practices, then just praying for things to happen, it is strong, it is good, and in certain conditions it will do the trick, but the majority of times, if it is just praying, okay, so let's let some divine power or God handle this situation or solve this, this mentality doesn't go too far. So this beauty that you are seeking, it's connected to your eyes, not to your face or your body, but your eyes. And this is what needs to be removed. But if this is the purpose for the spiritual path, this is not enough. It will not take you far. Okay, I had a Kundalini awakening in 2015, and my name is from the books of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Well, not sure what you mean of Kundalini awakening. Probably an experience that messed up you a little bit, that you were not ready. Maybe, if you want to elaborate this a little bit better, it will help. And this, how do you connect this first text about your first message and then these awakenings? Usually, if it is like this, it means personality was not ready for this, and you're still entertaining other values that are not in line with this spiritual experience that you had. So the more you let go of this and you continue your practices, the best it will be. But this needs a little bit of more information. And maybe this English is not very easy, but this is the best language. This is the common language that we have. So if you want to elaborate a little bit more now, or maybe during today or tomorrow, and I will continue this in another satsang. But these words, they kind of, what you said in the beginning and what you're talking now, this is kind of a journey, exemplifies of a journey, where the depression began and the reasons why it have begun and the path that this has taken you. And how did you arrive into this ashram? What was the means for it? What was the motivations for it? What was the context? But regarding that, the experience and the suffering that you are having, they are separate things. The suffering is making you look backwards into those worldly values, into common values that people are trying to live in the best way. And if they can, they are happy. If they cannot, they are miserable. And these spiritual awakenings, they direct you towards something very different from this. Okay, you are writing, so I will wait a little bit. Okay, Kiambi, I will answer your question now. As we wait for the complementation, I will answer this question. Other than meditation, how can someone sharpen his intuition? Depends what you mean with intuition and what you want to sharpen. Because intuition is in a sense like a channel of communication from the highest to where you stand. If you look at intuition as a tool for something, then you're a little bit confused about the purpose of all of this. So, and this is a mindset, this is a worldly mindset. So this intuition, it's a channel of communication that you stand alert to, that you pay attention. And the way to pay attention is to maintain the most silence possible. So meditation, it is one of it. And this meditative attention should be there. So this removing from worldly goals, worldly desires, this polarizing the mind towards all other investments, this will reduce noise more and more and will make you more more tuned to this channel. But don't make this channel into a tool to use. If you're doing this, then this shows that a lot of things are still misplaced. If you want to elaborate a little bit more on this. Okay, by Kundalini awakening, I mean energies rushing in my spine like a snake and body aches and astral traveling. I'm sorry for bothering you with my confusion. No bothering, and it doesn't bother at all. And you are in spiritual practices. You're in you're living in the ashram, you have spiritual disciplines, and you have your spiritual practices, and this is happening with the practices, or is this happening without any practices? This is important. Because this is fine, this is normal. These energies rushing in the spine and all these things, if you're in spiritual practices, this is normal. But what's not normal is the first questioning. So like I said previously, everything is moving into opposite directions. Usually, what does this mean? It means that the spiritual practices, the spiritual undertakings, they are there because of these worldly reasons of being accepted, of becoming beautiful, of restoring self-value, and all these worldly goals. So So usually this is what it means. Your suffering is connected to worldly things, and you're in a spiritual context, spiritual environment with spiritual practices. But if you're in the ashram and you're volunteering just to do some work and to help there, not involved in spiritual practices at all, so maybe this is something else. But you have a spiritual name for what you're saying. So this probably means initiation and all these things. So it still means the same. So as these worldly goals are there, it is difficult to continue to move forward in a steady way. And this will create confusions. And as your practices intensify, it will try to establish order, uh, harmony, silence eventually. And this means that everything which is misplaced has to come up, and this can create confusion, even depression, and all of these things until things go to their proper place. But if you're in an ashram, isn't there anyone guiding that process? Are you just alone in your spiritual practices? I'm sorry, I have no idea about how the ashram of Sri Aurobindo is, but I have this impression that there are monks there or something like this, and there's someone taking care of these things. So, but again, if you're just doing some work there and going, maybe you don't have access to this. So this clarification is good for you to give, and you're not bothering at all. Because if you're in a place like this, there should be someone guiding and clarifying on all these things. If there isn't, well, but like I said, I'm not sure what happens in this ashram. How is it? If there's anyone responsible, if it's just a place where devotees of Sri Aurobindo live, not sure. But whatever it means, if you're having these Kundalini experiences and the bases of the personality are not yet ready because of these worldly values, this will create unrest, a lot of difficulties, but this reveals, like I said previously, whatever you're suffering for reveals the values that you uphold dearly and shows you what needs to be removed. This is for all. And in a spiritual environment, if you're in the ashram, been initiated, having practices, first, if you've been initiated, so there must be someone there responsible for it. So this is the one you seek to. Because if the relationship is there, he should be the one to clarify this, because if he is putting you in these circumstances, there's something intended into this. If no one is there to take responsibility, if these are guidelines left, and if you cannot access this guidance from Sri Aurobindo itself, so then, well, then it is searching for this guidance is what's left. And these spiritual practices, if they are the ones bringing this, they are trying for sure, giving you an opportunity to change these values. Okay. So Thursday we'll be back again, same time. And whatever questions you have about this subject, you can send now, or you can send later. Instagram has already stopped for those who were there. So we'll end this also. Okay? Okay, so until Thursday, continue, intensify, make it real for you.